Welcome back to Heart with me, Shakti Sundari. I'm here once again at the amazing Bali Spirit Festival, and today we're just about to speak with Jeffrey Armstrong. Jeffrey is known worldwide as a Western master of Eastern wisdom. So welcome, Jeffrey.
Thank you. Namaste.
Namaste.
Good to see you again.
See you too. You are, on your website, the tagline for telling people about Jeffrey Armstrong is that you're a Western master of Eastern wisdom. Yeah. What does that mean?
Why that? Huh?
Why that? Yeah.
Well, the first thing I would say is that it's because I lived in our Western culture very completely. I was raised on horseback by a cowboy grandfather in Detroit, Michigan, in the industrialized Midwest. Had all the jobs, did all the things, champion wrestler. So Jeffrey Armstrong is like Neil Armstrong. You're solidly in this culture. So it isn't that I haven't lived in our culture. It's that our culture didn't have certain philosophical answers to questions about who we are and why life exists and how to live it, how to live in harmony with nature. And at a very young age, I also started asking those questions. That led me east. A degree in psychology kept leading me to India. The degree in literature kept leading me back through language to Sanskrit and India. So I inevitably was fully embodied here, and not just leaving it behind, but when I found the East, I couldn't deny that there was something valuable there that was a missing vitamin for us.
So I'm curious how or why those questions that you had about existence that you said you had from a very young age, why or you weren't finding those in your own culture? You know, for example, in the church or a traditional religion, which is a big thing in the States.
Yes. Well, as it turns out, using the church as an example with no disrespect to anyone, because everyone treated me wonderfully in my churches that I grew up in. So I was never traumatized. But they had a concept that we only live for one life. And to me, that didn't answer the situation very well. And we only live for one life. At first, it was just a child's intuition, but gradually it became a very important philosophical question. If you just have 20 minutes and I ask you a bunch of questions and you get them wrong and you suffer forever, that's actually scary. So a one lifetime worldview is actually very intimidating. And a many lifetime worldview relaxes you. You have many chances to get it right. Don't be so hard on yourself. So these natural questions arose in me, and my culture just didn't have answers. It had sick people and it gave them drugs, and that often made them sicker. And I saw it all around me. So those weren't answers. It didn't know what health was. It only knew how to look at disease.
So what gave you the capacity to view things from this very different perspective so young?
Probably my previous lives, that's how I would explain it. Because the saying goes in the yoga teachings that after each life, we still carry on something we've been doing, especially if it was enlightenment and a waking up completely. So I was no doubt at that stage. I'll tell you a secret. My father was an Air Force captain in World War II at 19. And he was stationed in Mumbai, in India. So then he got his wife pregnant, and that was 1945, and I was born in 1946. So years later in an ashram, I got it, and I called him on the phone and I said, Dad, when you were in India as a young man in the military, did you go to any Hindu temples? He said, yes. I said, did you eat any food they gave you? He said, yeah. What was it called? Prasad? It's prasad. Yeah. And the typical blessing a Hindu priest would give to someone from the West is, may you have a son who's devoted to Vishnu. I said, did you swim any rivers? He said, yeah, the Ganga or something like that. So in classic yogic terminology, if someone swims in the Ganga, goes to a temple, gets the blessings of the priest, they go home and have a baby who's a yogi. So here he is in Detroit, Michigan, with a gypsy wife. My mother was 100% gypsy from the place, from Romania. And so all of that.
So when you call yourself a yogi, what does that mean for you? Such a broad term.
Yes, well, it means for me that I am dedicated to knowing my true self and being in connection with all of the things greater than myself in a friendly, loving relationship, and of learning how to cooperate with nature and care deeply about the well-being of all beings. So enlightenment consists of those things, and yoga means connected, but I see it as connected to everyone, to everything, and doing your best to be a wholesome participant.
I get that. And does that mean that did you begin when you went to India, did you start with classic physical practice of yoga, or were you also studying a philosophy, or both?
Actually, before I ever went to India, I spent 5 years in ashrams in the United States with a guru from India.
Uh-huh.
So I slept on the floor, was barefooted, was celibate from 23 to 28.
Wow, how was that?
Oh, very intense. And it remade my whole personality and being, because I'd never lived that way. I had no movies, no pleasures, no tea, no coffee, no sexuality, no pleasures of any kind, just every day, 4 or 5 hours of sleep, serve your guru, chant mantras, practice yoga. And so then I went on to practice different kinds. So I learned asana, some pranayama, I learned Vedic astrology, I studied the Vedas, I studied Sanskrit. So it was a hunger in me that was very intense.
Yeah, I feel that so strong. Do you still have that hunger now? Is it something that's sated, or is it just a constant?
Yeah, it's more than ever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right, so we're talking about your brahmacharya period.
Right.
5 years, right in your 20s, when most guys are wanting to go out there and
sow their wild oats.
Yeah, exactly. What did that gift you, that experience?
It gifted me the realization of the yogic knowledge by practice, and a simple, humble, sparse living, so that I didn't indulge myself. And our culture is so specialized in indulgence. A little bit Western civilization and North America, and Europe too, to be fair, is like Rome at its peak, but especially North America and America, where I was born. We have everything. We had fossil fuel, Texas oil, and so we had everything. So that can spoil you and make you spoiled on the world standard of things. But by being humble and simple and sleeping on the floor with a blanket, even in cold climate places, and serving my guru for those 5 years, I went to a deeper level of being than I had ever gone to, being raised in the suburbs of Detroit, Michigan.
And what were your family saying to you then at this point?
Except for my grandmother, who loved me no matter what I did. They thought, of course, I was crazy. Because I was the eldest of 5 children. My father was both, and grandfather were both in the military. I was supposed to go next. I found a way to avoid going to Vietnam and unnecessarily harming innocent people. I didn't believe in that kind of fighting. And instead I went to the ashram, not as an alternative to that, but once I decided not to do that, I decided to find my true self as my strongest desire.
Beautiful. When did you start your teaching? Because obviously this is now a huge part of who you are, and
Yes.
your mission is teaching. How long has that been a part of your life?
Well, my guru asked us to try to share with people, even at a beginning stage of our knowing, to share in a respectful way, not to proselytize, but to share. So I taught from the beginning, and because I was good at speaking, I taught in the ashram quite soon, taught classes. But I actually waited till I was 50 years old on purpose to officially become a teacher, because I wanted to be mature enough that I didn't not have the character and maturity to be a guru and teacher. I wanted to have the inner strength and integrity so that I wouldn't have unfinished parts of myself before I began to teach others this important knowledge. So I waited till I was 50, and that was 20 years ago.
Wow.
So I've been full-time teaching for 20 years. And 20 years ago on my 50th birthday, I took a vow that the only thing I would do for the rest of my life is to teach the yogic, Vedic knowledge. No other job, no other source of income, nothing.
And since you made that vow, how has your life then unfolded?
Well, a miraculous thing happened that I hadn't counted on. I met a wonderful lady named Sandy Graham who joined with me and held that same wish, and together we have been doing this. So instead of being a sannyasi, renounced celibate guru, I'm a sannyasi, married celibate guru. Not really celibate, but shall we say with the kind of intimacy that's shared when you teach people enlightenment. And so a man and woman can do this just as easily, perhaps more so really, as a single celibate teacher can. But India's been colonized for 1,000 years, so most teachers have come to us as celibates.
Yeah.
But I'm a married or partnered guru, and my partner Sandy has been my other half, what they call Dharma Patni, my partner in teaching wisdom for the 20 years of our relationship.
That's very beautiful.
Very beautiful.
Very inspiring.
Yes, for us too.
When you met, did you feel, or did you know already that this was to be your path together, or did that just then unfold?
No, as it turned out, I was a corporate speaker at the end. I was 10 years a professional corporate speaker to Fortune 500 companies. And when Sandy and I met, she had a business as a speakers bureau in Vancouver, Canada. And she just finished 28 years at high-end retail, owning stores and being a well-decorated business professional in Vancouver. And I had been in Silicone Valley for 7 years and then 10 years a corporate speaker. And so we met, and she used me at first as a speaker because she was using speakers like Jane Goodall, people with a higher message, Tony Robbins, different kinds of people. So at first I was her client. And then after we got to know each other, we actually saw that our partnering could take place on a much deeper level. And then for both of us, this was what we wanted to do with the rest of our life.
I've got two questions that kind of want to lead off from that. I'm not sure which direction to go in. So the one is, you've mentioned working very much in the corporate sector,
right?
Which is a bit of a surprise to me, but I love that because I love being surprised. And I also love the notion of bringing spiritual teaching to the corporate world, because so often in the New Age consciousness movement, there's a sense of separation between those two worlds, right?
That's
or
right.
Even a judgment, which I've done that myself.
Big problem in our culture.
Yeah, so I would love to hear from you how you brought all of your spiritual wisdom to be fully in the business world and how that was.
Yes. Well, this was an interesting path because in my first marriage, which was for 21 years, I had one child purposely, and then that was the reason why I had to find a profession. And I tried to become a university professor, but by circumstance didn't quite finish the PhD, and ended up getting hired by Apple Computer to be their Middle Eastern sales manager, in charge of 30 Apple dealers in the Arab countries in 1980. And I had no computer experience whatsoever, but a degree in history and comparative religion. So they hired me as an ambassador to the Middle East on behalf of Apple Computer. So this interesting unfoldment took place. I couldn't tell anyone, especially in the Middle East, that I was a yogi. So I became an underground yogi working in high-level Silicone Valley for 7 years in its peak explosion time.
That is fascinating.
Yeah, it really was. So I got a crash course in business and in what corporations were on a good day and on a bad day. And I saw them from the inside and what needed to be fixed. So even now, I have a series of seminars for corporations called The Heart of the Corporate Warrior. High performance living, how to understand who you're dealing with and how to work with them successfully. And ultimately, I've added a new corporate officer to the corporation, the CCO, Chief Conscience Officer, so that corporations work for the planet and not just for profit.
So So back in that time when you were doing that work there in the Middle East, I guess I'm wondering, surely there were areas where your spiritual principles might have been compromised, and how did you deal with that? Or is that just an assumption that I'm making?
Well, you're right. At all the trade shows and things I had to go to, I was offered alcohol again and again and again and again. But once I joined the ashram, I never touched alcohol again since then. So in my entire career in Silicone Valley, no drugs, no alcohol. I followed the principles that were my life principles.
And how were you received by your colleagues?
Well, I'm smart enough that they had to respect me on the terms of what we were doing. So I ended up in a high-level sales position, eventually became a consultant, and then did a couple of startup companies. And so I gained the business skills of the environment I was in, and just took a crash course. And while I was at it, since it was technology, I got a crash course from my engineer friends on how technology works and understanding it as a technology. So I got another couple of MAs or PhDs while I was at it.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah.
So you were living fully in the world, being this.
Yes, hence Western Master of Eastern Wisdom.
Yeah, I get it.
I didn't run away from life.
Yeah.
I went right down the middle of it.
Yeah.
So 3 hours a day I had a commute back and forth from Silicon Valley to Santa Cruz. But I would chant mantras for 3 hours while I was traveling in the car. So when I got home, I'd read the Vedas and do my yoga practice in the morning or in the evening. So it became a full lifestyle, parallel with our Western lifestyle.
Yeah, that's what I love, is how it's integrated and not separated, and that you've lived that and you can demonstrate that.
Yeah.
And I want to hop back to what you were talking about in terms of then you're coming together with Sandy from that background.
Right.
And I know that one of the things that you also do is in your work, you're a relationship expert, or how would you call yourself?
Well, I teach a relationship seminar called the Ultimate Relationship Seminar.
Yeah.
My first degree in university was psychology.
Yeah.
And then by being in an ashram, you might say I got my PhD in human psychology and behavior.
Sure.
And so eventually, I'm also a Vedic astrologer, and astrology deals with the compatibility factors that make us compatible for anything, and especially a relationship.
Okay.
So all this sort of coalesced into seeing that in many societies, marriage is handled by the society. Mostly you do as you're told, and you get to choose a little bit, but you have to be like your society.
Mm-hmm.
But in our modern world, there's no societal net. So you have to get 80% of your compatibility from understanding who you're with, and without that, 60% divorce rate. So just think of it this way. You have to spend 6 weeks of learning to get a driver's license and none to get a marriage license. So I took that on as a problem, and I teach people how to have human relationships.
Oh, please tell me.
Well, first, make agreements. Second, communicate. And third, know the different levels of the being that you're with and how they will behave under different circumstances before you make an ultimate commitment.
What are the levels you talk about?
The levels are described in yoga teaching. There's the 5 elements that make our body, the 10 different body types of Ayurveda, Vata, Pitta, Kapha, and then there's the 5 koshas, or coverings of our physical body, the Annamaya, the food body, the Pranamaya, the energy body, the Manomaya, the mental and emotional faculties, Jnanamaya, the discernment body, and Anandamaya, the advancement level of our spiritual evolution. So those are like 5 different bodies, and we can find out the level of compatibility with all 5 so that we know if we really can go down the road together with somebody. And so that's another element that, so I wove all of these astrological, yogic, Vedic pieces of learning along with the psychological knowledge, practical skills, and created a body of learning that helps people self-actualize together. So I call it not looking for your soulmate, but soul mating.
And can you just remind me again the first 2 things? Having agreements?
Yes, one is having agreements, and the other is having good boundaries, and the other one is having good communication, which goes with that. So we were clear. And then it's knowing the different levels of your own being, so you can make sure that they match and are compatible.
So if a couple came to you, say we're a couple, and we come to you and we do this analysis, and we see that things are, I don't know, if we...
Sure.
What do you do if you see that according to this system, it's not such a great match? Can you change things?
Yeah, because most of these levels have some degree of changeability, but just by understanding something, we change. If we understand that your partner says, gets hungry 3 times a day and gets grumpy, and it's hurting you that they get grumpy, well, then if you understand that's just because they have a fire body type, then when they growl, you go, food. You don't get upset. You just say, oh, fine, you're hungry. Here, throw them some food. They'll say, why are you mad at me? Say, oh, my darling, you're hungry. You see? So many of these habits that we consider self really come from the nature of our body energies. The more understanding we have, the easier we are to live with. There's some tragic incompatibilities that you can't fix very easily.
Right.
But most people are suffering from not having good strategies for fixing things that can be fixed.
Right.
I'll tell you one great secret.
Tell me.
A Tantra guru taught me this. So this is what you live by in relationship. Ready? There's 3 secrets. Repeat after me. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
You're right.
You're right.
It must be the will of the divine.
It must be the will of the divine.
There you go. That'll fix almost anything. And a short memory for any pain that the one you love caused you, and for their faults, and wide eyes and enthusiasm for them all the time and every day, and express it all the time and every day. Not I love you only once on your birthday.
Yeah.
So lots of communication, lots of service, and an open mind for learning and growing, and an understanding of the parts that they can't change. Called the Ultimate Relationship Seminar.
Fantastic.
That's a kind of yoga, actually.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. In all your years of teaching this and holding space, what kinds of difficulties have you seen reoccurring again and again for people in their relating?
Well, you know, a very big one is we don't really recognize how much stress life and society and our job and our occupation are putting on us. And the person we partner with often becomes the one we take that out on or act that out on because we haven't even found out who we were, or society didn't have the right occupation for who we were. So a lot of marital problems are individual problems that possibly could be fixed and possibly can't be. In which case you may need a hobby to channel all that energy into, or some activity that will actually make a difference in how happy you are about yourself.
Right.
So self-satisfaction, curiosity killed the cat, satisfaction brought it back, is a big problem. Another one is that people evolve, and through that evolution, their partner may not evolve in the same direction because they hadn't found out all the things that need to be there, and they were flying in this direction, but the distance wasn't very great at the first few years.
Yeah.
At 10 years it was like that, and at 20 years it was like that. And at 30, you have to use a telephone to reach each other. So there's different traps like that. Some are societal, some are personal, some are both.
Thank you. When I was looking on your website, I saw the word transcendental, and I thought, oh, that's about ascending or going beyond.
Yes.
And yet in speaking, I very clearly get the sense that it's beyond here, but it's very grounded and rooted in the here.
Yes.
And in the embodiment of being a human being as well.
Yes. Just like a tree. Must have good roots and be rooted into the soil, but it must be receiving the energies that are coming from beyond our understanding. So a transcendentalist is not someone who denies matter or hates it or turns away from it. It's someone who realizes that consciousness is not coming from matter, and therefore we're not from here, so we must be transcendental beings on a long journey, and we're visiting and exploring the world of matter. That would explain a lot of things if that's true. And if we're here on a long journey that way, then when I look across at you and say namaste, and see inside of there is your immortal being that can't die. And if we both remember that, then our big problems shrink. Our tiny world gets bigger. Our vision of what's possible expands. All kinds of wonderful things happen. But it's not a jailbreak to become a yogi or a transcendentalist. Instead, it's to stay connected to the transcendental wirelessly while we're still here, and it changes how we do everything here. So that yoga in action is in India considered the highest yoga. Easy to get in a cave and hide out.
Absolutely.
And just close yourself down because there's nothing challenging that.
Absolutely.
Darkness, and yes, no one's there and you're lonely, but in a way it's easier to adjust to that and all this stimulation and all these choices and all these forces. And yet, testing yourself that way is the ultimate yoga, and that's what the Bhagavad Gita is. As someone on the so-called battlefield, going to work each day, being a yogi.
So you spoke about vision, and so in closing, I'd just like to ask, what is your vision for the world? You've been teaching many years now,
Yes.
Sharing your wisdom. What will you be most passionate to bring, to see, come to be?
You know, we're at a wonderful moment. There's a saying in the I Ching, the darkest moment is always just before the dawn. So obviously our world has grown in disproportionate ways over the last 100 or so years, with technological explosions happening, and fossil fuel energies and atomic energies and space races and so many things. So naturally, this is an even more disturbed moment in history than many others. The good news is, when everything is disturbed, we question everything. So that's when philosophers are born. That's when you ask the deeper questions, then who am I really? Then what would be the best way to live? Then what is the healthiest diet? So I'm hoping to produce a new group of thought leaders. I always like to say I'm not looking for followers, I'm looking to generate thought leaders who will know how to guide the world forward toward what? A sustainable world, good for future generations, that fosters their well-being, favorable to all living entities, so that they're respected and treated well and they have a life too, and a way of living that fosters our health and well-being, not emergency medicine, where we don't make money off of prisoners, we find a way to get them out of prison, where the way we look at each other is as we're all divine beings here on a journey. These are learned skills. There's no reason we can't share these skills with the world. So I'll just end with this, that unlike certain ways of teaching, yoga is never coercive and never tries to force anyone, either at gunpoint or finger point. It's not coercion, it's a conversation. So what I'm doing and trying to do is to lead the conversation forward. And so yoga is the first step, re-embodying, and the next step is knowledge tools that will allow us to live differently in this world. My goal is to bring yogic wisdom, psychology of yoga, all of those tools to a whole new generation and perhaps reach billions of people. We have the media.
We do.
And what's in it for me? The satisfaction that I performed a service that's serving the good of so many. That's what's in it for all great teachers. There's no payment for them other than the joy of knowing that others became wise. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeffrey.
Namaste.
Thank you so much for watching. Join me again next time on Heart to Heart with me, Shakti Sundari.